Constraint and invention. I want to talk about the interplay between constraint and invention, their interrelationship and their interdependency, because they've been useful. It's been a useful way for me to think about the work I've been doing in painting and in some related forms. It also might be a useful way to think about painting in general. By that I mean it's a fundamental sort of a priori of paintings that they're delimited. A painted surface has a distinct boundary, a framing edge, and everything that goes on inside that edge is the painter's responsibility. So I think of paintings as being dense in that way. Within those boundaries, within those spatial and material constraints, the painter, in lieu of finding new real estate, the painter is compelled to invent in that area. When resources are scarce, when boundaries are limiting, you have to be clever enough to maximize the return on what is available to you. In other words, to try to do a lot with the limited means at your disposal. This is a little painting. This is 20 by 16 inches from last July. Painted last July, that is. My experience as a painter convinces me that the limitations of a structure, format, genre, or medium may usefully provide a set of constraints. I say usefully because within those constraints, invention is essential to carve out a procedural space of one's own. Frank Stella talked years ago about working space. It's pretty good. I like procedural space, a little more specific. Painting provides one such set of parameters. As far as where I've taken painting, in my studio, painting for me has come to mean the trace or residue or evidence of a semi-improvisational procedure of which the outcome is to a large extent unforeseen. To that end, I have developed a small battery of devices that I use to apply paint to canvas or whatever it is I'm working on. The very crudeness and clunkiness of these devices estranges my will, my taste, my habits, visual habits, from that all-important moment when the paint and the substrate meet. The issue of my control of the visual outcome, how much control, of what kind, where exerted, remains for me the most exciting aspect of the work. This is also from last year. It's a bit bigger. This is about 3 feet high. None of these paintings that you're going to see are particularly large. If I forget to mention the dimensions or something like that, none of them is over probably 4 feet high. The paintings I make relate to relief printmaking, insofar as I make them not primarily with brushes, but rather with textured surfaces that convey the pigmented material to the substrate. They're technically monoprints because they're not additioned. They're unpredictable, like a monoprint, sort of like the monoprint you might make in a print shop, but even more unpredictable because the characteristics of acrylic paint are less predictable than the characteristics of oil-based media like ink. They could be additioned. That's simply a technical matter, but then the whole thing would become another very different kind of thing, a wholly controlled thing in which strategy trumps improvisation. So what I'm kind of cuddling up to is this question of strategy versus sensibility. Fortunately, I think you don't have to choose one over the other. It's certainly possible to coordinate a discursive framework and the element of surprise. It's been done, of course. The attraction of allowing yourself to depart from your own program is in acknowledging that the materials are smarter than you. They're certainly smarter than me. The medium is smarter than you, and it will tell you what to do. It will tell you how to deal with the constraints of itself and of the program that you've initiated, assuming that one has a program to begin with, that is, a program from which to depart. I've decided to concentrate in this talk on my work of the last 3 or so years, so all pretty recent stuff. I have several reasons for doing this. In part, this is because I'm looking for an alternative structure to what would otherwise be a long, hard 30-year slog through my development as an artist. And that's no way to end this series, I don't think. Unsuitably celebratory. Also, that development really is more of a series of, has been more of a series of cul-de-sacs and dead ends rather than any kind of seamless unfurling of fundamental set of concerns, or to put a more rhetorically fashionable spin on it, I could say that my work has proceeded along a series of ruptures with myself. Also, because my current work includes at least 3 distinct and somewhat autonomous bodies of work, each of which I will treat separately in this talk. And finally, because my current exhibition, Halftone Paintings, provides a convenient juncture at which to summarize, reflect upon, and assess my work of the last few years. I hope this decision not to dip too deeply or distantly into my back catalog will feel neither lopsided nor cursory, and I expect it will also have the advantage of creating the illusion of clarity. My understanding of the value of discourse is to impose clarity and legibility on the randomness and chaos of experience, so in that spirit, I'll concentrate on what has been absorbing my energies in recent years. So, in covering the last few years, 3 areas of concentration, as they say, bodies of work that I want to talk about. The halftone paintings, of which this is an example. This is about 30 by 24. This is typical in that it's acrylic on canvas, although I have used panels and paperboards and reinforced cradled panels and stuff like that. But in the last, maybe 18 months, returned to canvas, primarily. I want to talk about installation drawings, a series, I guess. They're a series, I keep doing them, that I started a couple of years ago, 1.5 years ago, which have sort of run parallel to the paintings. I call them drawings. They also include a lot of collage and found printed matter. And finally, these books that I've been doing for a couple of years, well, in earnest for the last year or so. These are sort of roughly hewn, handmade, unique. I mean, they're not. When I say books, they're not published or anything yet. But they are bound, sort of loosely bound between boards. They're essentially sculpture with pages, is how I think of them. And I did bring some examples in for you to look at if you're interested. Our interested parties can peruse them after the lecture. I want to talk about how each of these distinct projects function, emphasizing what's particular to each of, maybe peculiar too, but particular to each of them, what I get from doing each of them. And then toward the end of the talk, I'll have something to say about how they seem to interrelate, particularly in the context of an exhibition. The paintings, drawings, and books apparently, I gather, prop each other up in interesting ways in the exhibition context. So while you admire that, I'm going to do this. This is 40 by 40 inches, acrylic on canvas. The first thing that I want to say about this work is that images of it are woefully inadequate. Standard kind of disclaimer, I know, but it's especially true in the case of these paintings. All images, projected images, are a little bit misleading according to relative to scale. This is a bit large. It also doesn't, the images don't convey anything of the surface materiality, the tactility of the painting. It tends to read like a flat screen print or something, and it's really not. The surface is really quite active. But probably the most difficult thing is that the images don't convey the differing quality of light that comes off of the surface of the painting. The green, which I applied with the spray gun and a fine mist, is a glaze. It's a very luminous glaze. The other two colors are body color. So for the glaze, what that means is that there's light bouncing off of the, forgive me if you know this, but in case you don't, there's light bouncing off of the white gesso ground and coming up through, in this case, about 5 layers of pigment, of paint, which gives it a very, very luminous, imagine stained glass. It's sort of the stained glass effect, very luminous kind of glow. The orange and this third tone, this kind of purple gray tone, this is a detail, are body color, so strictly opaque. The light reflects off the surface of the body color only. And the two very different qualities of light, the refracted and the reflected, set up an optical shimmer that defines this particular painting's identity and the identity of many of the paintings that I'm going to be showing you. And the third problem, or I guess we're up to 4 problems now, is the fixed viewing distance. The pictorial space of these paintings that I'm making, and what I've heard described as the affect of the paintings, that is how it works on you on a bodily level, because we see with our whole bodies. That affect often shifts dramatically for viewers as they move up to or away from the painting, and that dynamic is, of course, lost in the images. Regardless of your distance from the screen, the information in the image itself is fixed. The image reports on the effect and the affect of a single predetermined viewing distance from the painting. Technical notes on this painting. I want to talk a little bit about how I make them. I make them using a deliberately crude monoprint technique, essentially a stamping method. I apply paint to any number of surfaces, and then offset print it to the painting surface. I touched on that a little bit earlier. I do this without really knowing what I'm going to get. The idea of working this very strange way is to distance or mediate or eliminate my direct touch, and to introduce a considerable degree of chance in the process. I have nothing against paintbrushes. Paintbrushes are amazing things, a great invention, like the pencil. But the value of the paintbrush is in providing ultimate control over the distribution of paint. As an extension of the hand, as a prosthesis, its intention is to really refine the sensitivity of the touch. And that's really not what I want to do at all. I'm interested in losing a considerable degree of control over the distribution of paint across the surface, and also losing control over the compositionality of the painting, and I get that through this kind of semi-mechanized application. This open-ended improvisational approach facilitates a considerable degree of indeterminacy and accident in the working process. This is 3 feet high. This is from 2012, so a little bit older than the ones we've already looked at. So as I conceive of it, each painting, you could think of it in this kind of evidentiary way. Each painting presents evidence of a series of decisions enacted in its proximity, in the proximity of the painting, that is, and coinciding at certain crucial moments with the surface of the painting. The monoprint mark is a deposit, a residue of a clumsy, imprecise operation, and that imprint is all that remains of a protracted and complex action, otherwise lost to time. Now, about halftone. It's my Costco card. For the price of a Costco membership, you too can have a really bad halftone portrait made. One of the materials that I work with to get that kind of effect leaves a trace, when I use it to print with, that may sometimes closely resemble a magnified photographic halftone. This is an example of a halftone, a kind of a goofy example. Halftone, as you might know, was developed about 90 years ago as a means of converting, for print media, as a means of converting the continuous tone as it exists in the original photographic emulsion to a screen of dots that simulates continuous tone when viewed under conditions that ordinarily apply when you're reading a newspaper or a book, and therefore is readily reproduced in print. The halftone treatment the halftone like distribution of dots, and it's not a grid. It's kind of a off-grid arrangement, but that particular arrangement signals. What does it signal, Stephen? It signals the presence of recognizable subject matter. You see that screen, and you expect to see something depicted. In my paintings, however, because the material is applied strictly by happenstance, with very little control, any imagery that you might see emerge from the surface is strictly inferred. You're inferring the presence of, I don't know, a Corot landscape maybe in this painting. It's not really there. I like very much something Alan McCollum, the New York-based appropriation artist, Alan McCollum, McCollum. Still working, very visible in the late 70s and into the 80s. And one of his sort of signal series is called Perpetual Photographs, in which he set up a camera in front of a TV screen and photographed prop artwork, photographed the screen, including what was unrecognizable but clearly prop artwork on the set of TV shows, cop shows and stuff like that. Very small, very blurry, basically illegible. And he then blew them up to the scale that they presumably were in actuality on the set. You can sort of see that something's there, but you can't really tell what it is. And he talks about this series of work being, he calls them images that are about our desire to see images. And I like that idea of the iconophilia, the fact that given a massing of lights and darks that seems to have some kind of specificity to it, that's not too dispersed, too all over, we really want there to be some subject matter. We want to see some image depicted. Are there images in my paintings? I'm going to say that there's not. An image, I think, is a representation. I think that's how we define an image, as a representation. If these paintings are images, they're, in the sense, representations of the process by which they're made. The residue of the process represents or denotes the entire procedure. It is its pictorial outcome. But of course, I delight in the futility of trying to foresee this outcome. To the extent that I suspend control over the process, the result is surprising to me, and I insist on being surprised. The Picturematic 5000. I'm going to ask you to sign something before you leave. I don't want anyone divulging the secret here. This is a sort of a pulley kind of system that I made to do these paintings with. This is another, basically the styrofoam. This is a slab of styrofoam, and this is that mesh stuff that I used to paint with. So the mesh gets covered with paint, hoisted, clipped, the palette pulled out, the painting pulled under, and the hoist comes down. And I kind of stamp them out like coins. I think of them as like striking these paintings like you strike a coin. It never works that way, but I still think of it like that. Stubborn that way. I like this very much because I'm basically impatient. I'm annoyed by the slowness of the conventional step-by-step process of making a painting. I like this procedure very much because it happens so fast. There's typically a ground color, as you've noticed by now, a ground color, a second color, sometimes a third color. my Baroque phase, 3 colors, wow. And then afterward, it becomes a matter of whether I accept or reject the result of this process according to whether I think it's interesting to look at. So there is this editing process. at all points really along the way. I would, in a perfect world, prefer to keep all the results, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But practical considerations such as storage prohibit me from doing that. This is 20 by 16 inches. And another reason I don't do that, I don't keep everything, is that ultimately I'm working toward making paintings. I'm really not trying to actualize an idea about how to make paintings. The technology in itself is not the point. And that's why I don't and won't ever exhibit the Picturematic 5000. The work is the work. The painted surface is primary. This is another small painting. I'm interested in the paradox of materiality and illusionistic space, or atmospheric space. So in that sense, I'm a modernist. I'm coming out of Cézanne, in a way. I'm curious about modernist pictorial space, where there's a sort of a paradoxical relationship between the illusion of three dimensions, brought about by interaction of hues, and a procedure that reiterates the surface and the support. This is a good example of that. In person, this does crazy things spatially. The sort of weird lavender and orange deal recedes way back in space, and that green, blue, green, gray moves forward, and it's like looking at an old-fashioned ViewMaster slide, you know, where they do that has that crazy kind of illusion of three dimensions. It's very strange. I don't imagine you're getting that here. And this is acrylic on raw linen. The studio-bound business of mixing colors, selecting and arranging tools, and so on, is preparation for this moment of contact between the wet paint and the substrate. One or two such moments usually suffice for a painting, maybe three. A technical means of making is incidental. The density and the weight reside in the painting itself, which is where the energy is focused, in just a few square feet. That's what I like most about painting, that the energy is focused. This is, of course, Seurat, Georges Seurat from 1888. I've got 5 slides I want to show you of, I guess influences, you could say. These are not so much influences, but kind of like markers or examples of when I think about what I do relative to history. These are the kind of issues really that I think about, and they're embodied in these particular artists. It's not that I'm a huge Seurat fan, in other words, although I do love the drawings. But what I love about these drawings is this nebulousness, the idea, the sort of feeling that you get that from this atmosphere, maybe it's a smoky cafe, cabaret atmosphere or something like that, these forms emerge and make themselves seen and make themselves known and make themselves felt. So the kind of interplay between form like solid ground, like that's the, what's that called, scroll of cello, I guess. How much detail is necessary, how much specificity of that shape is necessary to pick out that object, and on the other hand, to what extent does it blend into the atmosphere. Pollock from 1951. I'm an abstract painter, so I look at Pollock. That's what we do. The relationship to my paintings is probably pretty clear in terms of the shifting densities of light and dark. But I am this is like after mid-century. So this is after the big wonderful why he was put here kind of paintings that he did mid-century. Then he did these great black enamel paintings. And for my money, they're even more interesting because they suggest iconography. I was talking about the iconophilia thing a little bit earlier, and for me, that's what these paintings are really about. You could say maybe there's a figure in there, maybe it's an interior or something, but balancing this very fine line between legibility of subject matter and illegibility. So I love that work. I love Jean Dubuffet. This is a Jean Dubuffet from 1959, D-U-B-U-F-F-E-T. The aleatoric, chance operations. We know from Cage about the use of chance operations in musical composition. Too bad Cage wasn't a better artist, visual artist. I'd have one of those up here. But what I like about this Dubuffet is that it's one of a series of prints that he made from the back of an etching plate, a relief print, I believe. My source says a lithograph, but I don't think that's true. It seems to me it's a relief print that he made by inking up the back of an etching plate and running it through the press, and thereby catching incidental marks. Parallels to what I do. Andy Warhol, this is from 1978. I think Warhol was I mean, I could have put up the car crash, or I could have put up a very early. I was looking for one of those great photographs of Warhol and Gerard Malanga, you know, doing the silk screens. There we go, doing the silk screens on the floor of the factory. I think his Warhol's great revolution was technical. I think that the audacity, the cheekiness of using silk screen printing, the tool of commercial artists and sign painters, and at the time in the circa early '60s, the standard kind of technology for commercial art, to apply that to a fine art ambition. I can't imagine. I mean, it must have been such a slap in the face, you know, when I think of it, you know, it must have been just unbelievably audacious. So this is not that. This is later. This is, as I say, from '78, from a series of paintings of shadows. The series is called Shadows. They're enormous. I saw in the back room of David Zwirner. I think it was like 24 feet long or something. Just amazing. Very immersive, like a Moby Dick kind of immersive experience. So that's a big one. And then finally, in terms of the materiality, sheer materiality of paint, I've always loved Larry Poons. This is a Larry Poons painting from 1975. Larry Poons, Lawrence Poons, as he's known now, has still around, still working, shows I think at Deneze. Is that right? Deneze. Where? Loretta Howard, thank you, yeah. And now it's funny because now he's returned to the paintbrush, and he's doing these kind of very brushy, field-oriented sort of Lee Krasner things. But in the '60s, he was involved in the systems idea about sort of a minimalist, mathematically derived, systems-oriented paintings. And then into the '70s, the pendulum really swung back in the other direction, and he did these crazy paintings where he just propped up canvas in his studio and got on a ladder and poured painting. There's these torrents of paint coming down the canvas, and so that from top to bottom, can I zoom in? Yeah, from top to bottom, you see it's quite runny, streaky at the top, and then at the bottom it becomes very splattery. So it has this kind of funny, is that latitude? Latitudinal kind of shift. Terrible color, just awful, but it doesn't really matter. This is one of the installation drawings. Before I talk about the installation drawings, though, I want to just say a word. about photography, the relationship between painting and photography, because I've talked a lot about, well, Warhol. Roland Barthes said that a photograph, well, roughly he said, that a photograph is likened it to a ghost or a specter. And I think he meant that it was a photograph is a witness of what has been there. He said the essence of a photograph is to ratify what it represents. So I would say that my paintings, similarly, my paintings have ghosts. This is the way that they're like photographs. My paintings have ghosts. They have ghostly presences in them, but that's a different kind of ghost. The paintings I do might be the ghost of the process that made them, and if they are, then they would resemble photographs in that way. Installation drawings. This is a small collage. This is a lie. It's very small. In October of 2012, I started to draw installation layouts to scale on graph paper, really anal, as a way of planning out an exhibition, an upcoming exhibition of my paintings. The template that I settled on was basically this: a horizontal band along the bottom that demarcates the floor. There's a pencil line for you in the back. There's a faint pencil line there. That's the horizontal band. And then the rest of the page is an implied wall, typically a double square or nearly. This template, which is satisfying to work on, it soon proved quite useless for the purpose of planning installations, as you can imagine. What was I thinking? But the exercise developed momentum on its own terms as drawing. And with the addition of collage, both digital and actual collage, the process has made room for surrogate paintings. I think of these as surrogate paintings culled from a variety of sources, principally found printed matter. This work has provided me with a concrete way to think about issues that I deal with in a more physically elaborate way in the paintings. Things like compositionality, seriality, improvisation, presentation, and the psychology of visual perception. These drawings range in size. I'm going to just run through a few. The drawings range in size from just a few inches wide to about 22 by 30. Most are around 10 to 12 inches. Not a snicker? Not even a... In addition to the digital component, I've used everything: pencil, ink, acrylic, watercolor, collage, tape, glue, staples, color pencil, felt tip pen, ballpoint pen, spray enamel, tracing paper, Tyvek, Yupo, sawdust, charcoal, chalk, pastel, the list goes on and on, litho crayon, shellac, dirt, saliva. I'm skipping now. Found printed matter. Let's end with that one. As someone who is not terribly interested in subject matter, I'm surprised at the pleasure that I continue to derive from the repetitive practice, the repetitive practice of making these installation drawings, which ostensibly depict nameable objects in a plausible environment. The set of constraints I abide by, this template that I described, compels me to invent, in a few square inches, surrogates for my paintings, and for the floor, for that matter. The series has rigid graphical parameters, but allows me a promiscuous approach to materials and sources. And as such, it has become a meditation on the dynamic relationship between constraint and invention. That's right. Hey, that time it was pretty good. Now here I am at books. This is the third sort of thing that I wanted to talk about. Our time's okay, right? Time is good? Okay. These books are, I think of them as a hybrid form, drawing, monoprint, and sculpture, because they're very physical things. I'm completely beguiled by the book form as a delivery mechanism for work on paper. I've been absorbed by making books since early last summer. I have about 20 or so books in the studio that are in various states of completion. These are unique, handmade objects. They're essentially sculpture with pages. I work on them at a very different pace than I do the paintings, sort of manically. And usually I work on them when I'm frustrated by the glacial slowness of the paintings. When I started working on books, it very quickly became clear to me that the space of the page is fundamentally different from other manifestations or locations or sites of pictorial space. It's fascinating to me, for example, that I have made boring drawings into exciting pages simply by folding them in half. That's all you need to do. Take it from me. In the books I combine new work on paper, repurposed older work, technical experiments, and found printed material. This book that you're looking at is about 120 pages, including all kinds of weird gatefolds and overlays and half pages. This is the largest of the books that I've made to date. This is about, here it is on its stand. This opened up, this is about 33 inches. The book itself is about 30, and with the cover 33 by about 20 or so inches high. This is in the Brooklyn show, the show on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. As I said earlier, I've got some examples. You're welcome to look through them. Don't look for white gloves. You won't find any, but it's okay. Just go right ahead. I'm sure my hands are dirtier than yours. A huge difference between the paintings and the books is that the books are almost entirely unedited. Pretty much everything that I touch when I'm working on paper, 95% of it finds its way into a book one way or another. I said that I work on them quickly and versus slowly, the paintings, and that's true. It's also very true that the paintings are much more deliberate. The whole process is much more deliberate. I've got a few other spreads here. I'll just run through these real quickly. Do you like these better, or do you like the angled shots better? Who likes these better? I'm really curious. The angled shots. Likes, what does that mean? You know what I mean, like as a representation. And then the straight-on ones? Russell, thanks, man. Get your beer later. Yeah. On me. No, I'm like struggling with how to photograph these things, and I'm getting different opinions, different advice. The photographs don't really show the overlays, the gatefolds, the eccentricities of design, or of course they don't show the tactility of the experience, which is a big part of their appeal. But I think it might give you a sense that the book illuminates the thought and the decisions, to the extent that anything will. It illuminates the thought and the decisions behind the paintings, and in that those paintings, the pictorial vocabulary is much more reductive and refined. If the paintings are cooked, you might say, the books are still raw. This is unusual in that I sort of did this after the book was bound. In most cases, I'm working on the folios independently and then assembling them into signatures and then ordering the signatures and then sewing them up all or in part, wholly or in part. This is unusual in that I sort of attacked it after it was bound together. It was really fun. So this kind of brings me now, what I'm just talking about, the paintings as the books as a conduit to the paintings, brings me to the idea of audience. And I'm going to just sort of end with a few notes on the nature of the audience, my audience, the audience for abstract painting, maybe. The books that I've made in the last couple of years, I think, have helped me to bridge this apparent gap that I sense between my paintings and the community in which I exhibit them, and for that matter, the rest of the audience I'm trying to reach. This is a small exhibition in Montpelier last January with 2 paintings. There's a third painting, stage right, and the book in the stand that the bearded guy is looking at, and then another folding table with about 8 or 10 different books on it. And it became, there was always somebody sitting at this table. It was awesome. Every time I went into the gallery, there was somebody, usually more than one person, sitting at the table looking at these books. It was very satisfying. I think that the books are, well, certainly they're tactile in a way that paintings aren't. They're surprising, they're eccentric, they're personal, and they engage people on a visceral level. I think a lot of people feel they don't understand abstraction. Maybe they don't know enough to understand abstraction. Maybe they think there's a code of some kind that they're not privy to, but everybody knows how to operate a book. Many people who are not painters tell me that the books for them provide a way in to the paintings. Apparently the books, as a friend of mine put it, they establish the conditions of spectatorship for the paintings. I thought that was very nice, so I wrote it down. They established the conditions of spectatorship. The idea about audience, it's a point, I think well worth discussing, that like, for example, avant-garde jazz or the experimental novel, abstract painting can become academic. It can be in the sense that we paint for one another. We abstract painters paint for one another, and otherwise for a very minuscule, specialized audience, including the books, to include the move of including the books in the exhibition, as I did here last January, and as I do in the Brooklyn show, provides a historical, provides a backdrop or a context or a conceptual material conduit to what is going on in the paintings without compromising the integrity of the paintings by explaining them. In a sense, they explain the books, but they do so without impinging on that very rarefied and refined territory that the paintings seem to be occupying. In October, I'll have an exhibition of installation drawings and books at Millville House Publishers in Dumbo. It's a bookstore area, the bookstore area of that publisher's location in Dumbo. I'm eager to see what the response to the work will be in that context. Presenting books in a bookstore. What a concept. How very true to life. How you see something determines how you see something determines what you see in it. As I've been slow to learn about presentation, and the more as I make more and more books, I find myself approaching the exhibition itself as a medium. Thank you. There's one, I'll never find it. There's one that was basically red, yellow, and blue. It was one of the smaller ones toward the beginning. And when I was working on that one, when I did that one, I was very conscious of wanting to imitate. The model I had was this book of labels for cheap, like South Asian fireworks. Incredibly hard-hitting graphically, really kind of blunt color, and basically, a 3-color process. So that was really conscious. But the color is, I just slow way down for the color. I have kind of got a program, I guess, from which I depart. Where I will use a very saturated glaze usually as the first color, and then triangulate it with either another glaze and a neutralized body color, or sometimes 2 body colors, one neutralized, one saturated. So it sounds like it's systematic. It's really not. It's very trial and error. And I play with colored scraps of paper a lot, and I'm looking for that kind of spatial, atmospheric spatial situation that I described. I think that the thing for me is prolonged looking, you know. The thing for me, and this is not the sole province of abstraction by any means, you know, but I mentioned, for example, the painting that I joked was sort of like my Corot landscape. I feel like I know that painting. I know all I need to know about that painting now because I sort of pigeonholed it in that way, you know. I've come to grips with the subject matter, and I know how to look at it. I know how to look at it, really, you know. Whereas other paintings that, like what you're describing, I think it's, you know, the truism that you see something different every time you look at it. That's, for me, that's the exciting thing about working in this kind of sensorial, did you call it? Sensorious? Experiential, sort of affect-driven kind of way, you know. That the reading of it depends on ambient light, depends on time of day, depends on perceptual variables as much as anything else. Well, I was being a little facetious, but just a little. To pick Larry Poons as an example, Larry Poons in the 60s did one kind of painting, and in the 70s he did these encrusted things, and then in the 80s he did something else. I'm similar to Larry Poons in one respect, which is that I also have jumped around a lot from thing to thing, and but I'm most excited about the current work, of course, you know, and the current work is complicated in this way. It's got these different components: the books, the drawings, the paintings. I just felt it was there was enough to talk about to look at the work from the last 3 or so years. Of course, it's it raises an interesting kind of thing to think about, which is, you know, when you look back at your old work and cringe, you know, which I'm not necessarily saying that I do, but let's say you look back at your old work and it looks so different from what you're doing now. Let's put it that way. It looks very, very different from what you're doing now. But you know that on some level it's, you know, it's come from the same sensibility, less experienced version of the same sensibility. I've looked back at work and thought, I must burn that, and I've looked back at work and thought, no, it's, you know, it's pretty good, you know. So I don't know. It's kind of a funny thing when you reflect back on a lot of years of work and then try to find a through line, try to find a you know, that connective tissue from one body of work to another. It's really exhausting, and I'm not sure that it's particularly fruitful for me to do that right now. Yeah, it was a little, the question that I asked the audience was a little loaded because actually the angled photographs are simply better photographs than the head-on ones, you know. So it kind of made it difficult to, I don't know if you noticed that, but in terms of how you convey information about what the book is about, you know, like a painting, you just shoot it head-on. Do you do the same with a book, or do you sort of try to show something? Will they become more sculptural? I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm sorry. Yes, they will. No, what I like about that stand that you mentioned is that it allows people to it allows two people to look at it. Well, any number of people, but two people, let's say, can look at it simultaneously, and as one person leaps forward, front to back, the other person is looking at it upside down. But it's sort of another, you know, another way to, perfectly legitimate way to look at the book. So I don't know that the objects, the book says objects will become more sculptural, but I think that I'm going to be looking for ways to deploy them in space in a more complex way. I think I'm looking for less control, but my ace in the hole, you know, is the halftone. I mean, your description is really interesting because I can sort of stretch the boundaries pretty far, and as long as that particular sort of weird off-grid arrangement is there, it's going to signal, it's going to somehow trigger a response in the viewer to look for the, you know, the puppy dog or whatever, you know, in the look for the figurative element, you know. I showed one or two paintings where I'm combining that halftone with other things, and I think I showed a couple paintings where the paintings are getting actually kind of blotchy, getting away from the halftone. I'm curious to see what I can do combining different surfaces, you know.
Does it ever turn out that something looks too much like something after you're done with it?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, and yes, sometimes it does, and you know, can't have them around, can't show them. I don't know why. Well, I did one that looks very much like a window, and you would think that it's like the kind of like you're standing at the sink doing the dishes and you're looking out the window in the backyard. It's right there, you know, and I have misgivings about showing it, you know. Because why? Well, because that particular painting it gets filed too fast. You know, you talk about prolonged viewing. You look at it and you read it, and then you stop sort of reading it. But I like the idea of the unfulfilled promise of the image. You know, there's got to be something there if I can just make it out, kind of thing. And then if you in fact do. If the viewer does name it, attribute subject matter to it, then it's, you know, it's over for that viewer, for that experience, I think. It's a really great question, and it goes to the heart of a lot of, in fact, a lot of what I think about in the studio, and I try to proceed in such a way that I relinquish as much control as possible and still end up with a painting, but at the same time, there's a particular sort of field area in which the visual elements are interesting to me. In terms of craftsmanship, a great question, because in this painting, which is that the dark, and you can tell there's the red, and then there are two different darks very close, one sort of black, one sort of a purple black. But the paint has to be of a certain viscosity, or it's going to run all over the place and look like shit. The paint has to be like at a certain window of about 10 minutes from when I put it out on the palette. There's about a 10-minute period where I can work with it. And when it goes beyond that period, it starts to dry up and it gets too sticky and it doesn't do what I want it to do. See, and there I'm sort of giving the game away, because to a certain extent I don't know how I want it to look, but I know the issue. I know that I want, for example, the paint to be sticky enough and viscous enough for there to be an optical blending of hues, and not a film of paint. I want the paint to be arranged in dots so that the hues blend, you know, like the dollar bill The dollar bill green is, you know, exists only optically, for example. So I sort of stumble forward, kind of slowly relinquishing control, but at the same time, I want to recognize, in a sense, I want to recognize it when it's there. I want to recognize it as something that deals with the, you know, the materiality, the color, the acompositionality in a way that makes sense to me. This is my table. Yeah. Yeah, well, I knew I wanted it to go on a table, the book, and I thought, oh, I can really make this slick table, you know. And then I thought, well, you know, Brancusi, for example, never put a kind of crappy-looking sculpture on a real slick base. It was always the other way around, you know. There'd be the polished bronze on the chunky wood, you know. So I thought, I sort of took my cue from that. I wanted to have a table that was at least as ratty looking as the book, you know, not too slick.
But there is a certain elegance to it.
I like to think so. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's see. Well, I'm very lucky to have, you know, someone propping me up on a day-to-day basis, and I prop her up, and that goes a long way. I think what keeps me going? The idea of making something that I haven't seen before, you know, making something new, that and the money, you know, the big pot. No, I think, you know, I said that I want to surprise myself in the studio, and I think if I were, I can't imagine working this way, but if I were to go to the studio and execute, like Frank Stella, you know, like you decide what the thing is going to be, and then you do it, and you watch TV as you're painting or whatever, that would be crushing to me. So I mean, sort of, it would be, what's the word I want? Sort of demoralizing. So the idea that if I'm resourceful enough with my materials and clever enough with processes and procedures, I can do something that's you know, generally surprising. And I'll run into the next room and say, "Honey, look at this! Look what I did!" You know. But it's the surprise that I keep coming back for the surprises. Oh, I see. I think, yeah. I'm the material comes first for me. The color really comes first before anything. And I haven't talked very much about color because I don't understand it, and no one does. It's a mystery. It's trial and error in my case. You know, I mean, people have tried to. Of course, people have tried to systematize it and everything. And if you haven't read Joseph Albers, you should read Joseph Albers. Gila cracks up. Yeah, Stephen. All right. But I think you should. For me, I'll be looking around for something that I think will leave an interesting residue when I print with it. You know, something that will catch the paint nicely and release the paint nicely, and that's what I like about this particular matrix, this halftone thing. It's like made to do this stuff. You know, it picks up the paint, it releases the paint. And then if it gives me trouble in a way, if I have difficulty kind of processing what I've done, then you know, I keep it. and then I have to decide whether to continue to work on it. You know, keeping it, not throwing it away is the first decision. Then I have to decide whether I need to continue to work on it. No, I think it's I do this thing in my studio class, you know, where I sort of get people to self-impose a dialectic between what they ordinarily do and something out of left field, you know, and we do it through the medium of drawing. So I think it's crucial, you know. I mean, keep doing what you. I would say you need to keep doing what you are doing. Not every piece has to be a breakthrough. Not every piece has to be a masterpiece. You don't even have to keep every piece that you do. But I would say always, I think it's really important to always be looking for that kind of fresh input, whether that's an idea or a material or a procedure, to avoid getting into a rut. Now, I do want to say that you know, rut. You know, it sounds bad. A rut, you know, has a negative connotation. But I think of it sometimes as like a clearing in the woods, like you're walking through the woods and you come to a clearing in the woods and you go, oh, this is an interesting place to be. I'm going to work here for a while, you know, and you get to know that area. And then you've exhausted the possibilities of that little clearing in the woods, and it's time to pack up camp and move on again. That's not a rut, you know. As long as you maintain your, you know, your self-criticality, that's just working something through. You know, that's practice. That's practice, really. You know, and practice leads to mastery, but it also allows improvisation. You know, which I think is really important. I'm trying to remove the autographic mark as kind of a signifier of emotion, you know, that sort of angst-driven, turgid, abstract expressionist. I love those guys. Don't get me wrong, I do. But I'm going for. I think no. The answer is no. I'm not trying to remove emotion, but I certainly am trying to get to it from another direction, with another means other than my physical touch. Color is a big one, and a kind of sort of a semi-automated process, I think, complicates things. It's sort of a semi-technological kind of appearance that maybe is sort of the flip side of real available emotionality in the painting. I think it's I'm not really that interested in the immediate legibility of the handmade mark. You know, it does suggest emotion. It suggests, you know, expressionism, and so I'm interested in expressionism because I'm interested in emotion, but not that way. You know, not through that means. I want to get to it through other means. It's a weird thing. It is a weird thing because I'm trying to be hands off, but that doesn't necessarily. But I'm not a robot. I mean, I'm not trying to do, you know, affect-less paintings or anything like that. But I'm just trying to do, or maybe I am. I don't know. What do you think, Lulu?
It makes sense because, you know, it has its signature still, you know.
Yeah. No, it's kind of like trying to do something with a different set of tools than you know, than the usual, I think. Yeah. Anybody else have a question? This has been really a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Thank you all very much for being here.